Hey, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory that's due to Yahweh, Bashem Yahweh Shai, Bashem Rakakwadash. Double honor to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, who all learned this truth from the well. Peace and salutations to the 144,000, the rest of the 1/3, the large multitude. Until you, I say shalom. Coming to you back with another lesson through the Spirit, and I'm entitled this one, Majority of Jake Wants It on This Side. And who is Jake, which is a short or a nickname for Jacob, are the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, which are really the true Israelites that the scripture speaks about. Because during this captivity under the so-called white man, we've completely fell away from our heritage, from our identity of who we really are. And during this captivity, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, Jake, has been indoctrined by the so-called white man to believe that every nation is better than Jake, than the Israelites. That the rats over there in the land of Israel right now are the true people, that the white man is God. And pretty much Jake has been made to believe that this is as good as it gets. This current lifestyle, this current life here in Babylon the Great, which is America, is as good as it gets. So they've been sold a dream, a scam, a stumbling block by the white man to believe that America is the end all be all. That it doesn't get any better than this for the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. But Jake, majority of Jake, is blinded by the God of this world to believe that, the American dream is achievable. And, those few Jakes that do so-called make it, they made a hit the lottery or became celebrities, rappers, ball players, actors, whatever it may be. And now they're making millions of dollars. And, some Jake do hit those billions. But, majority of those Jakes who have gotten those billions, the Kanyes, Kanye West, the Jay-Z's, the Beyonces, the Tyler Perrys, you can see all the wickedness that they had to do, to get that position. So they did all that wickedness ultimately for a corruptible crown that Esau Edom is about to take away very soon when he crashes this system. So here you got Jake invested in a burning house that's about to collapse. That's why a lot of Jake, when this system collapses, they're going to bug out, because they put all their eggs into this basket, this society, this system, this Babylonian American system that relies on the slavery of the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. Because if Jake was to leave America, the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, if Jake was to stop working, then this place would collapse in one day. That's ultimately why Esau Edom isn't trying to let go of Jake. Just like back in the time of Egypt, during the time of Pharaoh. Pharaoh didn't want to let Jake go. He knew if they was to let Jake go, then that empire would collapse very quickly, which that's exactly what happened. As soon as the Israelites, the nation of Israel, exited Egypt, that empire crumbled and fell. And that's what's going to happen exactly when this current system collapses. All of the nation of Israel isn't going to be delivered on this side, only the 1/3, starting with the 144,000 and that large multitude, the believers, friends, helps, families of the prophets, ultimately because they weren't invested in the system. They were invested in the kingdom of heaven because they knew that something way better was coming. That incorruptible crown that Esau Edom can't take, unlike the so-called wealth, the dollars, the gold and silver, and even Jake that has invested in crypto. Esau Edom is about to take that all that away very soon, and Jake is going to completely bug out because they put all their mind energy into this system that's collapsing. because they can't wait. And even Jake, they know that they're Israelites. A lot of them have lost patience. Instead, they chose to sold out to Esau Edom, for that 501c3 to teach false doctrine so they could get the bag from Esau Edom because they want the kingdom on this side. But we're not going to get the kingdom on this side, because how are you going to build a kingdom on another kingdom? You can't build a kingdom inside a kingdom. And that's what Jake doesn't understand, that this so-called kingdom is the white man's, which is Esau Edom. It isn't for the nation of Israel. That's why ultimately this kingdom is only temporal, but the kingdom of heaven is eternal. But yet Jake doesn't want to wait. Jake wants it now. But ultimately that's why Jake is going to take the 2/3. Jake is going to take that MOTB and bow down to the system because they want it now. They got that Esau syndrome, selling their birthright for a morsel of meat. So that's ultimately why 2/3 of Jake are going to get destroyed for trying to get the kingdom on this side, which that's not the case. We got to wait on Yahweh Shai. This is Matthew chapter 6 and verse 33. But seek ye first the kingdom of Yahweh Bashmiel Shai and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. So seek ye first the kingdom of Yahweh Bashmiel Shai, the kingdom of heaven. That's what our eye is singled on. That's the main focus. Focusing on the kingdom of heaven. All that has been promised by Yahweh Bashmiel Shai to the nation of Israel. But the whole nation of Israel is going to get the kingdom, but not the whole nation. The whole nation isn't going to get the kingdom on the first go around. Only the elect, which is the 144,000, and the rest of the 1/3, the large multitude, the believers, friends, helps of the prophets, because they were focused on the kingdom of heaven. They set their eyes upon the kingdom, not upon his current life here in America, Babylon the Great, and wherever the elect are scattered, because they know that this isn't the end all be all. Yeah, we may have to, go to these jobs to get our daily bread, take care of our responsibilities, but ultimately we know that we got something better coming, that hope of salvation. Majority of Jake don't have that. That's why they're bugging out, because they have set all their eggs in this one basket in this current system that is rapidly collapsing. That's why Jake is bugging out, because they don't have that hope in the kingdom, unlike the elect. They want it now, and that's why a lot of Jake is doing abominable things, selling out to the so-called white man, which is Esau Edom, to get that corruptible bag, that corruptible crown. This is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Verse 25, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of Yahweh Bashmiel Shai than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So even Moses back then, Moses, he had a very high up position in the Egyptian empire, but yet he left that all behind, those pleasures of sin for a season, ultimately to suffer with the nation of Israel. And that's what the elect will be doing in these last days, because we know that those pleasures of sin, they're only temporal, and they're going to be done away with very soon. This current world is going to pass away in all the fashions that are therein. So what manner of persons should we be? Holy, separate from the rest of the world, and these 2/3 that are fulfilling the lust of the flesh, following after the flesh, trying to chase the American dream, go to college for 40 years and be in student debt the rest of their lives, just so they could graduate or drop out and then be in all this debt and not even find a job in this current economy that's collapsing as well. But Jake still wants to follow after the Babylonian wine, the Babylonian philosophies, get you a 9-to-5, get you a wife that's a harlot, and raise 2 YN kids, 2 GMO kids, and with the white picket fence. Jake is bugged out trying to chase all that corruptible things of this world, which is gonna pass away very soon. Trying to pop bottles at the club and chase the bag so they can impress Eve. That's ultimately why Jake does a lot of things he does, for the soul, for the women, But we know that those Jakes are gonna suffer a severe judgment. A lot of them are gonna take that MOTB. When Esau Edom collapses this system, they're gonna be begging for that solution, which is gonna be that micro Siha, which is the MOTB. But we know that this current world is passing away, but it's gonna be done away with very soon. So that's ultimately why the elect aren't invested in this current life. They're invested in the kingdom of heaven. This is verse 26, Hebrews 11 and 26, esteeming the reproach of Hamashiach greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. And what's that great reward? Is that salvation, which is going to lead to the kingdom of heaven on the first go around, being changed into those new bodies. That's what we're looking forward to, is looking forward to being delivered from these chains of darkness, these corruptible bodies. That's another thing that Jake doesn't get. That being in his flesh, is as good as it gets. Jake doesn't want anything better. They want to continue being in these bodies, even though you got to catch all these infirmities, deal with all this hell, these trials and tribulations, deal with demons fucking with you, people, heathens fucking with you at the job or whatever it may be. But yeah, Jake doesn't want to leave that. They want to keep being in these chains of darkness, even though Yahweh Shemiah Shai has already promised those new bodies to the whole nation of Israel, but only the elect are going to get it on the first go around. The rest of these 2/3, since they want to stay in these bodies and stay in this current lifestyle and live out the American dream, then Yahweh Shemiah Shai is going to leave them here. Verse 27, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured, as seeing him who is invisible. So Moses back then, he forsook Egypt, just like the elect are forsaking America, Babylon the Great on this go around. Detaching ourselves, calling out Esau Edom, the white man, that he's going down. The rest of Jake, they're scared of calling out Esau Edom. Ultimately, because they don't have no faith. They don't have no faith that Yahweh Shemiah Shai is going to keep them and deliver them during Jacob's trouble, martial law, during the famine, the plagues. That's why ultimately the elect are going to be fearing Yahweh Shemiah Shai, the invisible. But Jake doesn't believe just because they can't see it, but that's ultimately where faith comes in. Hebrews, I think verse 1, Hebrews 11 and verse 1. This is Matthew chapter 19 and verse 27. Then answered Peter and said unto him, behold, we have forsaken all and followed thee. What shall we have therefore? So Peter was asking a sincere question. We forsake everything. We have forsaken his life. What are we going to get? Verse 28, and Yahweh Shai said unto them, verily I say unto you, that ye which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, ye shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So when is that time of regeneration? It's right now. You got the 12 tribes over here in America, prophesying the destruction of Esau Edom and his kingdom, prophesying the deliverance of the elect, prophesying that Yahweh Shai is going to come during this generation. Ultimately, because just like the disciples, which later turned into apostles, left everything behind, the elect on this side here during this reincarnation here in America, Babylon the Great, they're going to be doing the same thing, forsaking this current life for the one to come, which is the kingdom of heaven. Verse 29, and every one that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my name's sake, shall receive an hundredfold, and shall inherit everlasting life. And that's ultimately what the elect are going to do. They're going to be forsaking all those things. But, 2/3 Jake, they're not willing to sacrifice and forsake that. They're not willing to forsake houses and their friends that they had in the world, or sisters, or fathers, or mothers. Some of the elect are going to even have to forsake their kids. Have to forsake, move cities and leave their family behind, ultimately to follow after Yahweh Shai. Just like the disciples did back then, they followed the Lamb wherever he went. So that's what the elect are going to be doing on this side, ultimately, because the elect know that all those things, the families, houses, jobs, women, children, whatever it may be, they're going to get that on the next life, which is the kingdom of heaven, 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. Jake, they want it on this side, even though it's temporal, even though damn well, okay, some Jake, it may get the millions and billions, but, you're going to grow old and die. And who are you going to leave those riches to? You don't even know. Your wicked children. And the King Solomon, he went into that. I have all this wealth, but who's going to take over it after they die? A wise person, or a person that, is void of judgment. That's what's vexing. Even though we may get all these riches, these 2/3 may get all those riches, what's going to happen after they die? Ultimately, they have to leave all that behind. But in the kingdom of heaven is going to be everlasting life. It's going to be new bodies which are going to be free of sin, which is that everlasting life. But yet, Jake don't want to wait. Jake wants it now. And that's ultimately why Yahweh Bashmiel Shai is going to let them get, those things that they wish for, but it's going to be a stumbling block that's going to lead to their destruction. This is Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. Verse 20, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. So we're not laying up treasures here upon the planet Earth in the sense that, we're going to rely upon these corruptible riches, stocking up on dollars, cash, gold, silver, building a bunker, trying to build up our 401k and pension because, we're going to pull it out when we retire, when we're 70. No, we're not doing that. Ultimately, us are the hopeful elect. We're storing up those treasures up in heaven by doing what was commanded by Yahweh Bashmiel Shai, by going out there on the highways and byways and preaching to the choir to help seal the elect, by giving, attendance to reading and doctrine, doing what was commanded by Yahweh Bashmiel Shai, putting up these lessons, these electronic epistles to help seal the elect, to help edify and build up the elect. Majority of 2/3 Jake, they see that as a waste of time, but that's because they haven't been given the Holy Spirit to understand what the will of Yahweh Bashmiel Shai is. Because they can't see the kingdom of heaven. But that's ultimately because they lack faith, because faith is a gift. Verse 21, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. In our heart, our la'ab, our mind, is set up on the kingdom of heaven, because we know that's the goal, the kingdom of heaven, everlasting life, the new bodies. But yet Jake wants it, they want it on this side. This is Luke chapter 6 and verse 24. But woe unto you that are rich, for ye shall receive your consolation. Woe unto you that are full, for ye shall hunger. Woe unto you that laugh now, for ye shall mourn and weep. So a lot of Jake, these 2/3, these celebrities, rappers, professional sports players, boxers, whatever it may be. They're rich, the Jay-Z's, the Kanye's, because they were chasing the bag, and ultimately Yahweh Bashem Yahushai allowed them to receive those riches, which are corruptible, because they had to do abominable things. A lot of these celebrities, they had to bend down literally for Esau, Edom. They had to sacrifice their family members, those blood sacrifices. A lot of Jake sold out, but ultimately for a corruptible crown, because very soon Esau, Edom's going to snatch it up. And he has already showed examples, like, for example, Kanye West, when he spoke about the powers against the small hats, they froze his bank accounts just like that at a snap of a finger. So ultimately, Esau, Edom, he can't take that away from the elect. He can't take the kingdom of heaven. And that's what he wants to do. That's why he wants to get everybody micro C hit up, so he could try to get to Jake, but ultimately he's not going to get to elect. He's only going to get to the 2/3. It says, verse 25, Luke 6:25, woe unto you that are full, for ye shall hunger. Woe unto you that laugh now, for ye shall mourn and weep. So a lot of Jake is full right now. They're laughing. They're in a spirit of mirth. Jake so-called made it in the world. They're millionaires. They're billionaires. They don't have a care. They don't have a care in the world. They're not worried about Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, because they're full. They're rich. Like it says, roughly paraphrasing, give me poverty nor riches. Food convenient for me. Because if you're too rich, if you have too much wealth, you're not worried about serving Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. If you're too poor, you're out there homeless, just trying to scrape some food up, you're not worried about Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. That's why Yahweh Bashem Yahushai gave the hope for the elect just enough to do the work, to believe, to give alms, whatever it may be. That perfect balance that Yahweh Bashem Yahushai gave to each member of the hopeful elect. Because each brother is different. Some brother may be able to handle more money. Some brother may not be able to handle that much money, so he just gives them just enough for the daily bread. But ultimately, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai gave each brother his lot, each believer his lot that he can handle. This is Mark chapter 8 and verse 35. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life for my sake in the Gospels, the same shall save it. So a lot of Jake is trying to save their life on this side, by chasing a bag and chase millions and sell out the Esau, Edom, especially these other Israelite camps. They have that mindset. If I sell out and I teach false doctrine, I teach that Esau, Edom, the white man, can make it, and that there's no Jacob's trouble. Not teaching the true names of the Heavenly Father and the only begotten Son, then the so-called white man, Esau, Edom's not going to come down so hard on me. He may spare my life. That's the mindset that these 2/3 that they know that the Israelites have, trying to save their life. But the elect, even though some of the elect are going to be martyrs for the testimony of Yahweh Shai, it don't matter if, we go under that guillotine and lose our life for the gospel's sake, for Yahweh Shai's sake, because we know that the elect that are martyrs are going to be risen up first. That's why when a lot of Jake gets rounded up into those detention centers, and they get offered the C-hip or go under the guillotine, a lot of Jake's going to take it for trying to save their life on this side, which is going to be a huge mistake. It says, verse 36, Mark 8 and 36, for what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the world and lose his own soul? So a lot of Jake has sold out, to so-called gain the whole world, but ultimately they sold out. They sold their, quote unquote, sold their soul to the devil, to Satan, which is really the so-called white man, Esau, Edom, selling out to those Amalekites, to those small hats, the gutter rats, so they could get a corruptible crown, some millions, billions, Kanye's, the Jay-Z's, the Beyonce's, the Tyler Perry. Look at Tyler Perry. Look what he got to do to get all that money. He's a mo. He got to dress as a woman to get all those billions of dollars that Esau Edom's giving him. But yet, all these Jakes got all these millions and billions, but they can't help out the nation of Israel. They can't help out the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, because under that contract that they signed is strictly prohibited from them to going into the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American communities and help them out. You know, all that money they got can only be spent on certain things, which is all vain and vanity and vainglory. It does, you know, it's not going to matter in the end. This is 2nd Ezra chapter 16 and verse 40. O my people, hear my word, make you ready to thy battle, and in those evils be even as pilgrims upon the earth. So that's what the elect are going to be doing. We're like it says in Micah chapter 2 and verse 10, arise and depart, for this is not our rest. You know, we're not invested in this system, in this kingdom, putting all our eggs in this current system, this collapsing, because we see through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shem Shai, through the Holy Spirit, that this place is collapsing rapidly. And it is all but just a event, a FLAG event, you know, falls from a collapse. You know, that's all Esau Edom needs to collapse this system, to collapse the dollar, to collapse this economy, for him to make that MOTB mandatory, which is going to lead to World War III and the utter destruction, the lake of fire, the intercontinental ballistic missiles that are going to be shot over here to the soils of America. So why should we be invested in this system when we know that it's going to be destroyed by missiles? You know, that's why a lot of these 2/3 Jakes, you know, they don't have that mindset. They have that mindset of establishing themselves here, building generational wealth. You know, they're trying to see their great grandchildren graduate college. That's the mindset that 2/3 of Jake is in. But the elect are going to be in that mindset of being pilgrims, detaching themselves from this system, from family, forsaking certain family, you know, maybe even children or women, jobs. You know, verse 41, he that selleth, let him be as he that fleeth away, and he that buyeth as one that will lose. Verse 42, he that occupied merchandise as he that had no profit by it, and he that builded as he that shall not dwell therein. So a lot of Jake is trying to establish themselves. You know, some of them have, you know, build up businesses, you know, but ultimately what Jake don't get is that we're under the curses. It don't matter how hard you try to get ahead, to try to be equal to the white man. We will never be equal to the white man in terms of wealth on this side, because this is not our kingdom. We're under the curses, and the curses won't be fully lifted away until we get delivered into those chariots and be changed into those new bodies. You know, but for now, we're not in that mindset of wanting it on this side and building up generational wealth for my great grandchildren so they can have a 401k and their pensions maxed out. No, that's going to be done away with very soon. Verse 43, he that soweth as he should not reap, so also he that planteth the vineyard as he that shall not gather grapes. So you got all these Jakes establishing all these businesses that have that mindset that they're going to be here for generations, for hundreds of years. But we see that this place doesn't have no 100, 200, 500 years, you know. This place is going to be done away with very soon. All the prophecies are knocking at the door. The two major prophecies that are left, which are the mass implementation of the MOTB and the Third World War, that's going to lead to the destruction of America and the collapse of the kingdom of Esau Edom. Verse 44, they that marry as they shall get no children, and they that marry not as the widowers. So you got all these different Jakes eating and marrying, drinking, giving into marriage. You know, they're in that flood behavior. You know, just before the flood hit is going to be the same in this modern age. Verse 45, and therefore they that labor in vain. So all these Jakes that are laboring for these dollars that are going to be done away with very soon, it's all in vain. Jake trying to max out their 401k. There's nothing wrong with getting a better job. If you could put yourself in a better position, that's fine. But ultimately, we know that when we have to walk away from these jobs, these careers, these places that allows us to get our daily bread and pay our bills, then elect are gonna walk away from that. But the 2/3, they're gonna want to go back to their jobs and be able to pay their bills. No, the elect are gonna have to walk away from that, because at that time point in period, the MOTB will be made mandatory, and to be able to hold a job, to pay rent, to go into the grocery stores, you're gonna have to have that MOTB, that micro CIB. That's why the elect, they're gonna fully trust and put their faith in Yahweh Bashmiel Shai to keep them in those days, to be able to be fed, to find shelter and raiment. Unlike the 2/3, they're gonna trust in Esau, Edom, to feed them and allow them to have a job and pay their rent. But ultimately, a lot of Jake who takes that MOTB, they're still not gonna be able to eat. Because ultimately they chose to bow down to this current system. They chose to bow down to Esau, Edom. So Yahweh Bashmiel Shai is going to destroy those 2/3 Jake. They couldn't wait to the kingdom. They wanted it on this side. They wanted to continue to dwell here in Babylon the Great. But ultimately that's going to lead to their destruction. But the elect aren't going to be invested in this place. They're going to be invested in the kingdom of heaven. They're going to be invested in that eternal life. And trying to get into those new bodies, trying to get delivered out of here, not trying to be invested in this place that's currently collapsing. But that's pretty much the point. Praise this is edifying to the elect. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, following this truth from the well. Peace and salutations to the 144,000, the rest of the 1/3, the large multitude. Unto you I say shalom.